Okay, the New Deal. Let's talk about it. Um, just one sec. There.
Professor,
Yeah.
will this lesson cover information on the exam? I think it does tangibly, right?
Yeah, this should cover. This lecture will cover some of the stuff that is on the exam in some more detail, but probably not a ton of detail. Originally, the exam was supposed to include World War II as well, but I'm like, well, that's not happening. So I tried to do the New Deal, like the Franklin Roosevelt era of New Deal, but keep it to kind of a lot of the main things there. Like I think I might have had a question in there about fireside chats and whatnot, but I was trying not to throw like too much stuff at you guys because we didn't cover it in as much depth as I normally would. Okay, so the New Deal, starting here, we're in 1933. Roosevelt gets elected at the end of 32, and he's going to get inaugurated at the beginning of the next year. At the same time, Hitler gets elected in Germany. And here's the thing that is probably very important for us to realize about that. Hitler was democratically elected by Christians in Germany. There's no coup. He didn't oust the military. Like the country went along with it and saying, cool, this is good. Hey, this is from God. Right? Like that can happen all over the place as we are seeing. Uh, so, so, Franklin Roosevelt, he gets elected at like a very dire time for Americans. It's like, ooh, I would not want to be president in 1932. You're not inheriting a lot of good stuff. Like, hey, if we do elect Joe Biden next week, feel sorry for that guy. He's inheriting a hot mess, and that's definitely where FDR was when he gets into the driver's seat in 1932. And to make all of that worse, we've got stuff like the Dust Bowl, which is a huge drought that basically consumes the entire Midwest. And because it's such a strong drought, the topsoil begins to dry out and it forms these massive, huge waves of dirt that blow across the country. You can see this is one of the pictures from 1934. Look at that. That looks crazy. I mean, that looks crazy. Um, they'd blow all the way to New York City. Like
That looks
they
like the Antelope Valley.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I'm like,
It's
I've been
like
in one of those in Nevada.
a big dust storm.
Yeah, while I was on the freeway, it was pretty bad.
Ooh, on the freeway.
Hmm.
Yeah, that'd be terrifying. That would be terrifying. And they get this in like, yeah, the Sahara, those will kick up. But this is not happening in America. And so this just felt like, okay, the country's in a massive depression. Things aren't good. Oh, and we've got a huge major drought. Like people were like, God is judging us. Like they felt like that. It was bad times, bad times. I put a thing in here about the Grapes of Wrath. It doesn't come out till the end of the 30s, the movie. But the book written by John Steinbeck, it's about this. It's about the Dust Bowl and how this event uproots hundreds of thousands of Americans who are very poor. And they move to the West Coast to look for work. A lot of people migrated to California because of this, but they don't
Ooh, I
find
got
lots
that
of work
answer
here.
right.
Yeah, yeah. They come out and like
What was the question?
they are uh, despised. They're called Okies, if you've ever heard
Hmm.
that term, from Oklahoma, right? Like, oh, those country bumpkins, those Okies, right? Like, oh, those dumb white trash people. That's how white people are talking about them in California. And so you can find signs from the 30s and 40s, like, and I'll just use the historic language here, so, excuse me in advance. But no Mexicans, no niggers, no Okies. Like on stores, like
I'm surprised you said that.
we don't want anybody in there that fits any of those groups, right? So yeah, racism is alive and alive in the 1930s. The Klan is growing, but people are just kind of like they're judgmental of lots of people. Like it's not all relegated to one group of people. It's like that was one of the things with Prohibition. It's like we don't want those dirty, Irish mix influencing our culture or having a big say in cities, or we want to disband that. Like we can spread the Irish people out and get rid of their like Irish culture and make them Americanized, right? Like, and this is the metaphor we've all heard of, the melting pot. It comes from a play in, I think, like 1909, where it's describing America as this big melting pot, which I never thought about growing up. When I heard that term, I'm like, yeah, I guess that's true. But that implies a certain thing, doesn't it? Like what happens in a melting pot?
Sir,
You melt everything, right? It all becomes one thing.
yeah, I read that in the works of the Italian political economist Alberto Alessina. I think that's how you pronounce his name. How he charted degrees of ethnic conflict in cities, and he pointed out how there's some, and especially when they live together, there's some degree of because they have to conduct business and what have you, and they're not segregated. But the thing is, those cities that have higher levels of ethnic conflict, they tend to be worse at picking up trash, worse at providing public services, and less likely to fund education. So like
you cut out a little bit on that end part. What were you saying now?
I have to interject here because the melting pot is bullshit. It always has been. And the decimation of indigenous race, ethnicities, I don't even like to use the word race, has been a cultural phenomenon across all continents, including the United States. So
absolutely. That's what I was realizing, having never really questioned it because it's such a common metaphor for America. And it's like, oh, that's assuming that there's one American culture and everybody that doesn't fit into that needs to get boiled down into it. Like we got to strip all this other stuff away and you come out the other end as an American, one culture, right? Which is bullshit. It's like, that's not America. That's not even how America was set up or formed. Yet that's kind of our overwhelming metaphor. I've heard some other ones, that I think are better. A mosaic, right? Which is like a picture or a mural that's made out of all kinds of different bits of glass or tile or something like that. Often broken tile. Or I've also heard like a tossed salad. Together, all those ingredients make a different thing and maybe even a better thing. But they're still different ingredients, right? There's still a cherry tomatoes and cheese and lettuce, and they can make one thing. But if it's a melting pot, it's like, oh, it's all one stew. It doesn't matter what you throw in there. It's going to taste like chili, right? Like it's supposed to all get reduced down. So like this melting pot idea, which is never defined. Nobody ever spells that out. It's kind of whatever people are thinking. Yeah, those people should be melted down into the, in the crucible of America to become Americans. It's a pretty destructive idea actually, and it goes along those like anti-foreigner lines that are really emerging during and after World War I.
Let me breed the black out of you, or breed the Mexican out of you. It's like it's a disgusting concept.
Professor,
yeah, totally.
You actually see that argument in pro-slavery arguments. Like the South considered that when they brought slaves and they carteled the market with slavery, they made the case that like through religious training and like slave labor, they redeemed blacks of their inferiority. like they were like civilizing them. There's that narrative even in slavery. It was a big part of slavery too.
You're totally right. And that's also the rationale that not just America, but all European countries were applying to the idea of colonialism, right? We looked at, we read The White Man's Burden, right? We looked at Rudyard Kipling and how him and other Westerners viewed these sullen people, half devil, half child, right? Like, what? Whoa. But it's like, they're uncivilized. They're not advanced. Our culture, our society is advanced. We are civilization, and we need to take that to them. And in some areas, that's not necessarily bad, right? Like bringing people modern medicine, giving folks that live near a river like malaria treatments, that is good. And they didn't have that going on, and Westerners start developing that stuff a lot earlier. So that's not necessarily bad. Like going someplace and saying, hey, we're going to build a modern hospital. Most people are not going to have a problem with that. But it's not like a hospital. It's like, we're going to go and build a hospital, and you need to stop wearing, this, tribal gear. You need to get like a suit, right? We'll go into West Africa and be like, hey, we're bringing you Christianity, and all you guys practicing polygamy, you need to divorce all your other wives except for one. Like, oh my God, that's so like destructive to a community. Also, like, polygamy is never prohibited in Christianity. Just throwing that out there. Just throw that bee in your bonnet. Yeah, so that idea of like, oh, we're gonna civilize these people. We have a mandate to raise them and grow them in terms of civilization. It's been around for a long time, and you're totally right. That was like the idea of pro-slavery arguments, and you would hear people.
I grew up in Indiana, and we had a lot of like cultural bullshit thrown at us because Indiana was named after Land of the Indians. Okay, so we basically slaughtered them all, and those that we couldn't slaughter, they were sent to Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like stunned, confused as a fifth grader, wondering what the hell.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just had to do that.
I mean, seriously. I mean, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Indianapolis, the Crossroads Nation.
Right.
I mean, we are just hypocrites.
Yeah.
In that country.
Well, and all the rivers have
Completely.
native names too, right? Which is true.
Well,
Most places on the East Coast, like the rivers, they were all named before any Europeans got there. So they're like, this river over here, and they're like, well, that's the Chattahoochee. You're like, what the hell's the Chattahoochee? Like,
Chattahoochee.
yeah. So we adopt it, and I was reading a book. I've got a book here at my office. It's an old encyclopedia of world history. Harvard published it, but it's from like 1948, 49. It's really old. And it is shocking to read about how Harvard historians, okay, we're not talking about like country bumpkin people, Harvard, they write about this. I'm right at the part of the Civil War where they're talking about America, and they're like, what was the word they used? They said, the taming of the Plains Indians. And then they talk about this and how, America had to do this to progress forward and look at all the things it got. And it's like, oh, we have different perspectives on things than people had back in the day. Like, we do not see things the same way as folks from the past, probably for good in a lot of cases, not necessarily all of them. So the Grapes of Wrath, and the movie's great for this. It wins the Academy Award in '39. It's a really good movie. Worth watching if you're ever feeling like in the mood for a classic. I'm going to play this right here. This is one of Franklin Roosevelt's quote unquote fireside chats. And this was like
It's a
one of
great
the
movie.
reasons
It's a great movie if you want to watch it. I mean, if
Grapes of
you're-
Wrath?
Oh yeah, Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Yeah, it's
I've watched
it's totally good. And Steinbeck's like, you know, one of the most important American authors of the 20th century, hands down.
Well, I actually preferred Of Mice and Men from him, but
Oh yeah.
but
Yeah. East of Eden. Did he write? No, that's a play. I was going to say Streetcar Named Desire. I think that's Tennessee Williams. Anyways, I'm going to play this just a few, 30 seconds of this audio clip from Franklin Roosevelt, so you can hear his voice for yourself. This is wild for people. Like, the president is just going to make regular addresses to the American public without a bunch of pomp and circumstance and just talk to them on the radio. And they're going to sit in their living room and listen to the president of the United States. 20 years before this, nobody had seen the president of the United States. Like, most people hadn't even seen a picture of the president of the United States 50 years before this. Now you're going to hear them talking to you in your house. So there is a parallel here. There's a lot of parallels drawn between Franklin Roosevelt and Obama. Rightfully so. I think there's a lot of things that overlap. Inheriting a really bad economy. Kind of saying little catchphrasey things that sound good but don't actually mean anything, right? Like, we've got nothing to fear but fear itself. What? That's stupid. What about clowns? We should be afraid of them. What about spiders? Like, there's a lot of stuff we should be afraid of, man. But like, when the nation's crumbling, that's really good news. They want to hear somebody that says that and speaks with confidence. Obama gets up and he's like, hope we can believe in.
1920.
What is hope we can believe in? What exactly are we hoping in? Nobody ever defines that, and you don't have to. It's just political, slogans. It's political jargon to get people to like support you. And just like Obama got elected, a major factor for him getting elected in 2008 was his use of social media, like using Twitter and social media to like fundraise and kind of grow a base that's outside of the regular media at the time, at least. The radio, like, he's really the first president to really like utilize the radio this way. And it's, it's revolutionary. The fidelity is not great.
On a Sunday night, a week after my inauguration, I used the radio to tell you about the banking crisis and about the measures we were taking to meet it. In that way, I tried to make clear to the country various facts that might otherwise have been misunderstood, and in general to provide a means of understanding, which I believe did much to restore confidence. Tonight, 8 weeks later, I come for the second time to give you my report in the same spirit and by the same means to tell you about what we have been doing and what we are planning to do. 2 months ago, as you know, we were facing serious problems. The country was dying by inches. It was dying because trade and commerce had declined to dangerously low levels. Prices for basic commodities were such as to destroy the value of the assets of national institutions, such as banks and savings banks and insurance companies and others. These institutions, because of their great needs, were foreclosing mortgages, they were calling loans, and they were refusing credit. Thus, there was actually in process of destruction the property of millions of people who had borrowed money on that property in terms of dollars, which had an entirely different value from the level of March 1933.
So you can hear him there. It's not. He was a great orator.
I don't want to interrupt you, Professor, but this is exactly what happened in 2008.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's exactly. It's like what Obama did with social media. It's like, oh, hey, you're going to utilize this and suddenly seem a lot more in touch with the rest of the country than anybody else. Even if you're not, like, just the appearance of that with, using radio. And here's another crazy thing about media in the day. FDR's in a wheelchair, right? Like, he's crippled from the legs down from polio. that he contracted in the 20s. I've heard a theory that he actually had Huntington's disease, and that's onset early kind of immobilized him from walking. I don't know. It's a theory. I don't know if that's true at all. He's crippled.
He was immobile as well as Kennedy. So
Kennedy?
That's not funny. Sorry.
Well, yeah. So the public didn't know that though. Imagine. Okay. We would never elect a president in a wheelchair. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying America would never do that. We like to think of the president as strong, even though we're, trying to decide between two 77-year-old men.
Well, correct me if
Good
I'm
thing we
wrong,
did,
but
though.
when we voted for president, or when they voted for presidency back then, a lot of people didn't even know who was actually elected until, I heard that, not, the president wasn't on all the ballots, so people didn't, from different states, if he wasn't on there, they had no idea who he was.
That's actually still true today about the ballots. Like in some places, certain candidates don't show up on ballots, and yeah, people were it was much less personal, the election of a president, and it was, if people supported them, it was either because they were just supporting the party and they knew about the party, and there's local chapters of each party, or they knew about that specific person's track record, voting record, history on any of those things, and they'd vote for that. But once you get here, this becomes a little bit more about personality, charisma, how you present yourself. So he's in a wheelchair and nobody knows it because the press didn't show it. They're like, hey, don't show pictures, don't take pictures or publish pictures of the president in a wheelchair. So most of the American public didn't know this. It wasn't like a total secret. It just wasn't broadcast, and there's no Wikipedia page somebody could pull up to look up FDR and read about him. And they went to some pretty great lengths to try to present in a compelling way that he was not immobilized. So when he gets nominated for the presidential ticket, he hops on a plane and flies to, I think it's Chicago, for the nominating, convention, the party, to accept it in person. Nobody did that. Nobody ever did that. They don't go travel for that, and traveling's hard and expensive, but airplanes are starting to become safe to travel in here. People did not trust them in the teens and 20s. They're just starting to become more viable. Commercial flights are becoming a thing. So he uses technology there to leapfrog over any perception about his disability or being weak or ineffective. And when he'd give speeches publicly, they'd often have a banister or like a covered rail.
No, they'd have a person hanging over him to prop him up.
Yeah, they'd be
There.
behind him, pushing him. He'd be
exactly.
almost like a dolly.
Exactly.
So he's just looking like he's walking,
It's a puppet on a string.
just kind of floating up there, give his speech, and then float back down. He couldn't walk up there, but people thought he did.
The guy was disabled, but Jesus Christ.
He's a dynamo. That is crazy. Dude, this guy was disabled, and he did a lot. And so in this fireside chat, you heard him talking about banks and banking laws and all that stuff at the beginning, because the country's in a crisis and banks are collapsing. And before Franklin Roosevelt and before the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, if a bank collapsed and your money was in it, it is gone. Like a bank does shady stuff and goes out of business, all your money's gone with it too. So if you knew people that grew up in the Depression, my grandma did. She was born in 1920. They keep money in the freezer or in their mattress, right? I don't trust no banks. And today I'm
Why we're having a change shortage right now, because no one, I know a lot of people that just refuse to go to the ATM, just for example, Bank of America, because now they're holding checks for longer.
No. The thing is that with COVID hit, a lot of the businesses and everything, the money wasn't circulating. So
Yeah.
the people weren't spending the money how, traveling and, tourism and stuff like that, money exchange from other countries. So a lot of it had to do with COVID. That's one of the reasons for the
A lot of it
exchange.
too with the change is dirty. You know, the homeless people touch it.
Correct.
It just
Correct.
it tracks. So they
But
definitely they
that
want
was
it to
the
be a
second-
cashless society, anyways.
So that was the second reason, but the main reason is because our country lost a lot of money. Everybody did,
Mm.
So that's why it's a shortage.
Yeah. Well, and this is not why we have a real corn shortage, but there are some Pentecostal churches in America telling all of their parishioners to get all of their money out of the banks and to put it all in silver and gold and bury it in their backyards. I'm not making this up. There's a church in the Antelope Valley that does this, and they're not the only one. Like, oh my gosh. But people freak out when things are uncertain. So if a, smooth talking guy that comes along and says, you got nothing to fear but fear itself, just trust me, we're really happy to do that. We're like, God, yes, I'll trust you.
We need to get like a lot of metal finding machines into Antelope Valley.
Just go take everybody's. Oh yeah, let's go like do the metal detectors in all the Pentecostals' backyards. We'll get rich. You can see here the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is made to like regulate Wall Street. There is also I think it was maybe a little bit earlier, the Glass-Steagall Act, actually maybe it's down this way, is passed to bar commercial banks from playing the stock market with your and my money.
Oh, I got that question right.
The Republicans repeal that in 89, I think. They get rid of it.
89, bitch.
And then what happens? Like, the stock market goes crazy. It starts getting super volatile. Banks lose tons of money because they're betting with your money. And it's very complicated, but like...
Because now we can just bet with your money.
Yeah, and they weren't even necessarily playing the stock market. It's like they were betting on securities, like insurance on
They're
corporations.
betting on your life.
Yeah, well, yeah, they sure
betting
are.
on health insurance. They were betting on everything. It became the casino stock market.
Yes,
When
yes.
the Glass-Steagall Act hit.
There's actually
repealed.
there's a handful of really good movies on that too. I don't know if you guys saw The Big Short. That came out like 3 or 4 years ago. There's a ton of people in it, like Christian Bale, Steve Carell, I think Ryan Gosling. It's a great movie. It's a true story. It shows the whole background on like people that recognized the bubble popping long before it popped, and the government trying to like push them aside or clean up their act. Another one was called Too Big to Fail. It's actually an HBO movie that again follows the kind of true life timeline of not the buildup to everything crashing, but once it starts to crash, right at the end of 2008, as everything's kind of imploding and the presidential election is coming, they get into all these different ins and outs of this, and it's very complicated. That's I'm like, yeah, this is banks betting against other banks and against their investments. It's complicated. If you watch The Big Short, I think you'll get a good understanding.
Betting against your own shareholders' investments. That was the key.
Yeah,
That
it's like
was the bullshit.
this is crazy. How did nobody see this coming?
Who bets against their own customers? I mean, come on.
Right? If a baseball club did that, we would lock them all in jail.
Well, the Dodgers.
Guess how many people we arrested or tried or put in jail after 2008? Zero. Nobody. Nobody was held accountable for any of that.
Nobody was put up for anything, even though there were clear. I mean,
Yeah, clear things.
This was just comical, really.
Mm.
I mean, you couldn't put anybody for jail. I mean, can't I just like rip off 100 candy bars out of your store and just walk off of it, and you can't do shit to me? You know?
Right here, talking about like corralling the banks and corporations. Franklin Roosevelt does try to do a good job of that, and here's a big difference between him and Obama.
And then there was a lot of antitrust.
Yeah, Obama gets elected, and he does not come from money. Franklin Roosevelt lives in Hyde Park. Like his family,
Right.
the Roosevelts
He
have
was
been
rich
in
motherfucker.
America since
Rich,
New
I
York
bet.
was called New Amsterdam. They're Dutch. they freaking made New York and have been around the whole time. And Franklin Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt, they both of them, they speak Dutch at home
Right?
so that the servant class can't understand them. That's money. That's a level of money. Like, I don't even know if that exists today. That kind of level of like money,
I don't
old
know
money and
anybody that
power.
speaks Dutch. I don't.
Yeah.
I
So
swear
he's
to God.
not like, he's got money. He's not like overly concerned about like kissing the boots of big banks. He goes into to deal with them, ironically, because he's rich. Obama is not. And you would think somebody that has such a progressive, progressive reputation as Obama,
He
would have
wasn't
done some.
progressive.
He's not
He was
progressive
the
at
new
all.
Reagan.
He didn't do shit with the corporations. He gave more money to the banks and then didn't hold any of them accountable, and then hired some of them for his cabinet.
Best Republican president. This is what I always compare Obama to. He's the best Republican president we've ever had.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton probably would have been second too. It's like these people are not progressive at all. Their economic
They're not
policies
even
are neoconservative.
Democrats, really, they're just like, oh,
Yeah.
I got elected president.
This guy,
Well, good
Huey
for me.
Long, he's much more radical than FDR, and he has this. You can see a campaign to nationalize assets like railroads and stuff that a lot of other countries have done. There's like a share our wealth plan of like redistributing some wealth, guaranteed income, like some very progressive stuff. He's incredibly popular. There's a good chance he would have dislodged FDR at some point and won the ticket, but he gets assassinated for some of those reasons, I think. I put in here a few other things about just kind of radicalization that's happening in America at this time. And then we'll come back to this after the break. We're going to come back and probably start World War II right here about oil, because that's a different thing. So there you can see that's J. Edgar Hoover right there. He's a big player during this time. And read through this. It's about the end of the New Deal, or the first New Deal, if you will. So Roosevelt, he tries so many different things. Last week, I showed you guys the alphabet soup and all these different organizations and groups and administrations and acts that he starts. Some of them were great and brilliant. Some of them were a little crazy. Some of them just didn't work. He's known as like the great experimenter. He is probably the first modern president. He's probably the first president that really, truly did outsource a lot of the presidency to better, smarter, more capable people than him. Like John Maynard Keynes, he meets with Roosevelt because he's trying to fix the economy. So he's talking to everybody, and this guy's like a emerging star, if you can have a economic star, I guess. So he meets them. Keynes comes out and tells people like, oh, the president is an economic illiterate. Like he doesn't know anything about the economy or economics or how anything works. But he also knew that he didn't. He wasn't trying to pretend he did. He was not trying to pretend that he was like the master at international relations and foreign policy. During World War II, he kind of becomes that. But like, he leans on his cabinet very heavily, and a lot of the members of his cabinet become well-known, American politicians. Frances Perkins, his secretary, she becomes Secretary of Commerce at a very important position in the midst of a giant, depression and crisis. She's the first female cabinet member. He also has an unofficial black cabinet of like black intellectuals and leaders and politicians who advise him on stuff. He's not fantastic on civil rights. What's that?
Are you okay?
Yeah, I hear some groanings.
Right? It sounds like you're in pain. Or
Well, yeah. So Franklin Roosevelt, he's trying out all kinds of stuff, and taking ideas, but a lot of them are controversial, because a lot of them are just new things. Like, we've never tried anything like that. And in the case of stuff like Social Security, nobody's ever tried anything like that. A couple countries have some form of old age insurance, but it's usually pretty linked to socialism, actually. So he does all these things. And one of the things that is a central element or piece to the New Deal, the first New Deal, is the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act. And then some of the organizations that go with that, they, for the most part, the way Franklin Roosevelt dealt with this was by letting businesses or certain industries set quotas and standards for themselves. So like the auto industry had to stop making so many cars because people can't buy them. They're overproducing cars. The car companies start losing money. And still nobody can buy cars. And when they do, they're selling them at such a cheaper rate now that they're not making profit off of it. And this is a classic problem that farmers have always experienced. Even the tenant farmers of the South after the Civil War, right? Cotton's at an all-time low historically because of global production. But poor, recently freed slaves that don't know how to do anything but farm cotton, just keep farming cotton. And they're like, well, the price just keeps dropping. Means I got to farm more cotton. And if everybody's doing that, it's just going to keep dropping the price down. So they were trying to avoid that element with farmers, but with industry as a whole. And so the problem with that, though, is they say, okay, industry, get together and set quotas and standards and whatnot for yourselves. And we will back that. So they do that with the auto industry. And before 1929, you've got I think it's 150 car manufacturers in America. All kinds of cars you've never heard of. Small car companies by the end of the New Deal and, after World War II, after Franklin Roosevelt's term, you basically have 4 auto manufacturers in America. They disappear. The big corporations, the big industries get to set the rules. And of course, they make all the rules in their favor. They're not making rules that are helping the little guy. Nowhere, not in any of the industries. So I was talking to Noah about his group project earlier at the break, and he was saying, I think referring to that same economist, that they talk about this as the Great Compression, because it shores up and solidifies a lot of industries, but it also just kind of squeezes them down and together and shoots out a bunch of the little guys. Is that right, Noah?
Well, you're on the right track. The book's called Pivotal Decade. It's
The Pivotal
a great book.
Decade, that's right.
I'm trying to read it. Yeah. You should write that down.
I am.
Pivotal Decade. Yeah, and the thing is, she calls it the Great Compression because there's a lot of, at least according to inequality metrics, there's a lot of inequality in the 20s. And then in the 30s, you kind of had to clamp down on that because societies around the world had a crisis of capitalism because there was all this instability from the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So the Great Compression referred to the emergence of unions, the emergence of new regulatory agencies, and the emergence of higher forms of taxation, for example, how that compressed all wages, and it made, like, I imagine the economy as a network of interactions. Like Cesar Hidalgo is a physicist who makes the case that from a physics lens, what imbues certain physical arrangements with value is the institutions and the way we interact with physical arrangements. And he made the example of a Bugatti, how it's millions of dollars while it's intact. But if you crash it, all the arrangements are there, but it's useless because it's crashed.
A Bugatti, yeah. That's a good analogy.
Yeah. So like, I was hit home. I was like, wow, it's brilliant. And he's more complicated in how he did it, but that's basically it. So the Great Compression referred to like the restructuring of the economy with unions, with higher taxes, and a variety of other things. So yeah, you're kind of on track. But yeah I referred to, like I said, with the corporate hierarchy, how it was just reorganized.
That sounds good. That's I did write it down. That sounds like a good book to read. The 1920s, right? We think of it as a decade of prosperity because everybody prospered. I mean, kind of everybody did compared to before World War I. Even black communities are better off. A lot of black families leave the South. It's like 10-15% of the South leaves because of World War I. And yeah, like on that level, people do well in the 20s, but they don't do as well as the rich, and that inequality, that inequity gap grows further and further in the 1920s, kind of the same way it has in the last 30 years, 40 years, where the policies under Franklin Roosevelt combined with like just the state of the nation, like people are much more willing to try new things, or if things are really bad and dire, those things combine to actually make a much better, healthier economy. Home ownership winds up going up after the Depression. Real wages grow in the 30s. The wealth gap closes quite a bit during the 1930s.
That's Keynesian economics, and how that's how I'm networking in Keynesian economics into my project. Because thing is, like I said before, if you have a corporate hierarchy and you have these big corporations, but you have all this business uncertainty because you don't know who's going to buy your stuff, and you're kind of leading the market. I'm not justifying abuse, but at the same time, it's a logical conclusion to abuse your workers and fire them, and you get it. Like it just makes a lot of sense. But if you have a restructuring of markets, like unions, taxes, regulatory agencies, and you create more certainty through what's it called? I forget what the term's called, but the thing is, if you micromanage the economy with all these instruments, even if you don't think it's a good thing, what happens is you increase business certainty. So they're more willing to take.
Yeah, no, you totally do. You can increase certainty. You can help stabilize things. You can give people like assurances in the economy, like, hey, they might not make a ton of profit next year, but they're not going to be overproducing stuff. Oh, okay, I can put money back in the stock market in that, or for GM or whatever. Did I hear a question?
Yes, I have a question. I've heard the Black Wall Street. Where is that in the era? In the 20s or in the 30s?
I think that's in the 20s, right? Because that is part of the Tulsa massacre, from what I understand. Just like in earlier, maybe a couple decades earlier, there is, it's really horrible. I think it's in Wilmington, North Carolina, where it was one of the most prosperous like black communities in America. And there was like a street war waged by white people to disenfranchise and disempower them. That's something though that I want to read more on and probably include more of in our material on these things. With like the control of production on things, I mentioned farmers. It was not unique to people in the 30s. Like farmers have done this historically, where they overproduce or grow too much of one crop and prices fall and they're just poor. And like Franklin Roosevelt was saying in his fireside chat, like, well, they leveraged their home to get this new tractor or to buy like seed or to get extra land, and then everything crashes. They can't make any money, and here comes the bank to take away their house now. There's millions of Americans in similar circumstances. It's a bad situation. So one of the most controversial acts that happens in the first New Deal is the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Wait, or was it administration? I can't always remember the difference there. But it's the AAA. That's easy to remember. Where they go in and tell farmers, like, they set quotas for things, and they do some really crazy things. Like, the government, I don't even know how to wrap my mind around this still. The government slaughters 5 million pigs so that the price of pork will go up for, like, pig raisers, pig herders, pig ranchers. What? They don't even like, hey, we're going to buy all this meat from you and give it to all the poor people. We're going to just destroy the pigs so the price of bacon and sausage can go back up to, like, a living price for farmers. That sounds crazy. Like, oh, what? That seems kind of nuts. And then the government in general kind of coming into industries and saying, you can't make this, you can make this, you can only make so much of this, seems pretty, like, counter to capitalism, at least, to that invisible hand of the free market and supply and demand. So the Supreme Court comes and they declare some of these things unconstitutional. Even while they're working and successful at the goal of what they were trying to do, the government comes in and says, like, or the court says, no, you can't do that. That's a breach of the Constitution and is fundamentally un-American. So some of these things get taken apart, but not all of them. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, it was a great one that stayed around for actually a really long time, where the government employed like 2.5, 3 million people that are out of work and gave them jobs like building benches at parks and, making trails on, like, our national parks and forests and, repairing bridges, like all these good things that are as much better use of government money than simply just giving people money. And that was a wildly successful program. It put millions of American men to work. But then there's also some of these other things where it's like, well, the government instituted a policy of, like, one household income. So you couldn't have two people work, a married couple both working for the government, and then that winds up extending to, like, lots of the corporations where it's, there's such widespread unemployment. We're not going to employ two people from the same household. We got to spread that around a little bit. So guess who gets fired every time out of that split? Women, always. Like, it is just assumed you're just working for extra. They called it pin money, where you'd pin it to the inside of your pocket or your coat. Spending money, which of course wasn't true for lots of families or women. But yeah, they get the raw end of the deal on that. And so there's some controversial policies. There's some things that people were upset about back then that they probably rightfully should have been upset about. And then there's some other things that just seem so wild to us. 6 million pigs. I got the number wrong. 6 million pigs. So yeah, you can see all that right here and read about, like, the kind of complexities of these and some of the cabinet members for Franklin Roosevelt. And the first New Deal, and this is maybe the easiest way to remember this. This would be a good thing to put in notes if you're trying to study stuff. The first New Deal is about recovery. Just trying to save the economy, getting out of the hole. By the time we get to the second New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt is, like, looking more towards. It's more about prosperity. It's more about, like, stability, ensuring that what we've done now can stay going and stay on the path of like progress. So it's less radical in a lot of ways. You do see things like the Social Security Act make it on there. The Works Progress Administration, which, funds artists. They pay to have murals be painted because, well, it's kind of like now when the economy's bad, artists are usually suffering a lot. There's not a lot of people paying to go see plays right now. But when the government's like, hey, we'll help fund artists to write plays, to put on plays.
Wasn't that part of the what is that place in New York?
There are a lot of places in New York, my friend.
Well,
more specific
the place
than
in
that.
New York that had the grand artist do a grand mural there, and the freaking it's escaping the top of my head. But
yeah, well, no, there's a good handful of like pretty prominent things that come out of that, works of art, murals. This also, I think I mentioned this last week, it funds for authors and historians to do projects like go record on audio tape all of the last living slaves, record their narratives. So we've got hundreds of like firsthand accounts that we would not have had the government not paid a very, very, very small amount of money to do. It wasn't like millions and millions of dollars for that one project.
I'm just thinking that there's this one that the Grand Trade Center, the I can't remember off the top of my head.
Is it in the train station? Is it Grand Central?
Grand Central, yes. There was a massive art project done there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this funded that. It paid for that. So these kinds of those things are less controversial and actually work very well. And by far, probably one of the most popular ones is Social Security, which Republicans in the day were trying to actively dismantle. And like, had we elected a Republican president in 1940, they probably would have ended that. But by the time we get to the post-war, Harry Truman's he's like a New Deal Democrat. He's, he promotes Social Security, but Eisenhower doesn't try to like take it down at all. He increases the level of what you'd get from Social Security. So it shifts from not so much should we be doing this to how should we be doing this. But this is a popular one. Was that
Professor? I think Eisenhower said I might be wrong that the party that tries to get rid of Social Security will not be seen in American politics for 50 years.
Ooh, I think that sounds like Eisenhower. He said when it comes to matters of finance, I'm a conservative, but when it comes to humans, I'm a liberal. Which, I don't know necessarily what that means.
After FDR, there was a complete change, and I really do think he said something like that, like we can't touch Social Security if we want to win, because it's just too popular, because it takes care of people that takes care of your great grandma.
Yeah,
They're trying to get rid of it now.
They are. The Republicans are like definitely trying to get rid of it, not because it's a bad thing, but because it's government spending. It's like, dude, there's going to be millions of elderly people eating out of the trash can if you get rid of this, which is how the idea came around. Dr. Townsend, I think it's Townsend, a physician, a California physician, came up with this idea after going outside and seeing two old ladies digging through his trash can to try to find food to eat. He's like,
yep,
we should not be doing this. No advanced industrial nation should have their old people like living in abject poverty. Like what? We can stop this.
Don't we pay into Social Security?
Most people do. It cuts out some people like domestic servants, most of whom were women and most of whom were black. Migrant workers, field workers. There's a few people that don't get included on that, but most everybody else does. You pay into it, and you pay half, and your employer is supposed to pay half. So it's like 15%. It's a lot of money. And then, health insurance gets attached to that and some other things. So So it's yeah, I mean, it's not working very well right now. One of the biggest premises that this was built on was the assumption that the next generation will always be larger than the previous generation and that they will have more money, which is definitely true for the baby boomers that are born after the war. But they don't have as many kids as their parents did by a long shot. And so Gen X is smaller than the baby boomers. And baby boomers are living longer and they're getting more, into consumerism and stuff. So they're working a lot longer, therefore not retiring or dying and giving younger people their jobs and keeping kind of younger generations always a bit underneath them financially, which doesn't help them pay into Social Security that the older people are going to need. So now you've got an imbalance where, because that was how you do it. Like, well, we're going to get all this money to pay elderly people thousands of dollars every month. We'll take it from the current Social Security payments of people, and the young will always just be funding Social Security for the old. But that only works if that assumption, turns out to be true.
May I ask a question, sir?
Sure.
Do you consider Social Security an entitlement? Because I don't. We are basically have paid into a fund. I mean,
Yeah.
the Z generation and the X generation hasn't so much, but the Y generation, millennials, haven't paid so much into it. But it is an entitlement program paid through a special type of treasury bill called the E-Treasury bill. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's supposed to earn interest.
Right. It is an entitlement program, but that's not bad, right? Like we hear entitlement, and the Republicans for so long have been like just toxically trying to spill out this stuff of like poor people that are getting money from the government, they're just mooching, they're entitled, like they're just entitled brats and they didn't work for this. It's like, that categorically is not true about Social Security. Like, you pay into it, you're entitled to get it. You should get it. The same thing's true for workers' comp, unemployment insurance. Like, if you get fired, or laid off, feel zero shame about taking unemployment. You paid for it. You've gotten money taken out of every paycheck you've ever paid taxes on. You better take it when you need it. You're entitled to it. That's what it's there for. It's not a bad thing to take. It's for us. And that is also like a key difference there between Franklin Roosevelt, his approach to these current world economic problems that everybody's facing, and some of the other options around the world. So like, this is not socialism in the sense of classic socialism. It's a little verging on there. But really, like, you have to pay in to get anything out of it. That's capitalism. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know that that's my place to judge at all. It's just what it is. And so our old age insurance, it works different than other old age insurance in other countries that are more socialistic. The other response too is like autocratic authoritarianism, fascism. So what you see with Mussolini, with Stalin, with Hitler, like Mussolini is a fascist. The state controls everything, more so than the NIRA did, more so than any of these acts of anything. Like, they're just openly okay with that, and that's good. And when the state does that in Italy and in Germany, when you see Hitler get elected, it's very effective. It works. Like, if you do that, you can turn the economy around like that and provide jobs for people. But it does stifle competition, innovation, like freedom of thought, freedom of speech. All of those things get constricted, which in the long run does not produce a healthy economy. But in the short term, it's very effective. So that's a good thing to kind of hold in the balance there and weigh when you're thinking about the 30s, the Great Depression, the rise of all these other powerful leaders around the world, like Franklin Roosevelt's different, and America's approach to these problems is different than other nations, for better or for
I don't want
worse.
to dominate your conversation, but since you brought up Francisco Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, oh, we gotta go there because
Oh, we are.
we gotta go. Francisco Franco, he basically started off the fascist regime.
Franco
Yeah,
in
many
Spain
comments.
or Mussolini
Yes,
in
of
Italy?
Spain. Of Spain.
Okay, we're gonna come
he
back there
basically-
after the break. So I don't want. We're gonna talk about them definitely, but we'll wait. We'll wait. In the meantime, just
Okay.
hold who
And we
Franklin
could go
Roosevelt
to
is up
Italy,
there.
and then we could go to Germany.
Yeah, indeed. So
'Cause
here,
they
here's this
basically
like,
went along that line.
yeah. So here's this short video on like Keynesian economics to break that down a little bit more. Like I said, had you watched this video, read through this before the test, not a problem. You'd get the answer to that question easily. But like if you pulled this up without having read it in the test, like, well, that's a lot to read, and it's thick. It's economics. You're not
Oh,
going to be
I
able
know.
to process that in a minute or two.
Oh,
I've already processed.
Well, you were not in the test,
Let me
which is
guess.
good for
Let me
you.
guess. Noah got this one right.
What's that?
I said, let me guess. Noah got this one right.
I'm pretty sure Noah probably got that one right. Yeah.
We'll see.
Cool.
Franklin Roosevelt, you can see this here. In 1936, he is elected by a landslide victory, a huge one. He's wildly popular. He put millions and millions of Americans back to work and brought the economy up after 3 years of it being in the total dumpster fire. So even if all his things didn't work and everybody doesn't agree with all his policies, in the view of Americans, at least, he's getting the job done. I'm still cleaning this last section up here, so this is not quite as well manicured as the rest of our stuff so far. Yeah, you see like unionism grow in this period. Let me just check these last things
Sir,
here.
there was also a militant labor movement.
Yeah.
So unionism did not grow. It was like forced upon. There's networking between FDR and union officials. Like I'll pass your legislation and I'll back you up in Congress, but you better make some noise. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like kind of
The Pinkertons.
closing thoughts on the New Deal then would be, this is, it works. It helps America's economy. Not all of it is effective, but in large part, it's effective in terms of what they wanted to get done. But it doesn't fix the economy. It doesn't make it a thriving economy. It helps the national community bond and coalesce better together and starts more federal programs. What John Maynard Keynes is saying in his theory on economics is that when you are in a consumer economy, which we still are, like our economy is based on us buying things and always buying stuff. Like if everybody just decided to stop buying extra stuff for a year and everybody in America's like, I'm saving all my extra money. I'm not buying a new car. I'm not going out and getting a new thing from Best Buy. Our economy would implode. It would collapse on itself. He could see that back then when other people couldn't. People like Herbert Hoover, who was a pretty consistently conservative guy, said, no, the economy's got to right itself. Like the supply and demand has to take over and balance things out, which is true and probably would have worked after 10, 15, 20 years. Like it would have been ugly though. He said, no, look, if you want to get the economy back up, you have to just dump money into it. The government can assume debts. Like you have to just pour money into it to jumpstart it. It's like the defibrillator paddles. Like we're just going to dump money in, charge, boom. What FDR does that a little bit, and that's why you see those improvements. But it's not it. World War II is what's going to prove. It's going to vindicate his theories and prove like, oh yeah, oh look at this. Oh my God, America's got the strongest economy that's ever existed in the world anywhere because of World War II, and that like massive amount of government spending and government debt that gets incurred from it. So like the New Deal is working to a degree, but like Keynes pointed out, once the war comes, and not even when America joins the war, but like when it starts picking up in Europe, American production starts blowing up. America starts investing more and more in weapons and, you know, technologies. They knew we were pretty sure we were going to have to get involved in a war. FDR knew it early on.
I don't think you understand so much about what happened. What the hell happened after World War II?
Oh well, you're getting quite far ahead of ourselves there. That will be for probably 2 weeks from now, because before we really get into that, we'll be in the Korean War, and there is a massive depression. What's that?
I can hear someone's mic in the back.
Yeah, I can too. Why don't you mute yourselves, guys? Thank you. There's a massive depression right after the war, just like there was after World War I, because our wartime economy stops. That's why, if you guys remember that William Randolph Bourne quote from the hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. If you remember that quote from William Randolph Bourne from World War I, war is the health of the state, right? Like the government is good when we're at war. People don't question stuff. We will continually pump money into the economy and justify it because of war, therefore giving people jobs and making the national economy booming. But when the war ends, that drops, it disappears, and you have to rebuild on a peacetime economy.
Kind of General Smedley to me.
What's that?
General Smedley from World War I. If you're a history of.
Yeah.
Professor?
Yeah.
Who's the one who said that? That's my project, so I missed that.
Which one's your project?
Smedley.
Huh?
Which one's your project, Eddie?
My question is the word that you just said that somebody said that war is good. Who was that, so I could look it up?
William Randolph Bourne. He's like a pretty popular journalist, columnist at the beginning of the 20th century. If you guys are familiar with H.L. Mencken, he kind of takes Bourne's place, for the middle of the 20th century as like America's journalist. So both of them have all kinds of quippy little quotes like that are like, that's kind of packs a punch.
I don't want to take your place, Professor, but William Smedley, Major General Smedley, remember that guy?
No, I'm not as familiar with him.
You need to be familiar with him because he was a World War I general who basically said he was the original.
The original what?
He was the original person that said exactly what.
Oh, that quote?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The industrial, military complex.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's an Eisenhower. That is a quote we will get into a lot because it is one of the most important things said by a president.
Major Smedley made the same comment like 20 years earlier.
Yeah. And it's not like that was like revolutionary to people. Like governments have known that for centuries. Like, oh, things are bad, let's start a war. Oh, our economy's dropping and let's go to war with France. Let's go invade these people. Let's have a border skirmish, which before the Industrial Revolution you can have. But once you get into like World War I, it's like, You can't have border skirmishes with industrialized nations. It's hell on earth. It's like crazy and all consuming, and will just suck you into it. So yeah, there's some historic changes there in terms of like the way people think about war. But in terms of war being good for the governments waging it, that's been true. That's probably been true for thousands of years. That people were aware of that too. Bourne just like, yeah, that was like a more famous quote of his. That was like, I think he said it during the war. He said it in like 1917 or 18, right as America's entering the war. Okay, this is a great place to take a break. It's 8 o'clock already. Let's do like a 15-minute break, and we'll come in and do the ramp up leading to the war. We're not going to get to Pearl Harbor tonight. We're not going to get to America's involvement in the war, but that's okay. Because long before we get there, we have to understand why the war started in the first place and how it unfolds. And I've been posing this to you guys for weeks now, especially when we're looking at the Russo-Japanese War back in 1905. Like, when does World War II start? Well, if you ask the Koreans, it started in at least 1905. It might be a little bit earlier when the Japanese were moving in there. Yeah. If you ask Poland when it started, yeah, it's like when Germany invades Poland. If you ask Czechoslovakia when it started, well, it's a little bit before Poland. So it depends on who you're asking and who you're talking about. We usually start World War II at Pearl Harbor or maybe the invasion of Poland. We're certainly never thinking about Asia as Americans. Like, we're very Eurocentric in our history. So we'll go all the way back and look at some of these steps, like the Russo-Japanese War.
I like you, man. You're cool.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, guys, let's come back at, let's say 8:15. We'll take a 20-minute breather, stretch our legs. I'll take a break from talking incessantly, and we'll come back and talk about World War